And this one is an undeniable fact now. Morocco is the best team on the African continent in terms of countries. Because just at the ended World Cup, they made it to the semi-final. And then FIFA has released the list, the updated list of the rankings, the FIFA rankings in Africa. We'll get into it in this video. I don't know what I'm doing. Hello and welcome to African Football. My name is Dennis Kofi. And as I said earlier, we are talking about the FIFA rankings, which was released by FIFA. So in the top 10 rankings for Africa, of course, leading the chart, Morocco needs no introduction. As I mentioned earlier on in my introduction, they're the best team in Africa at the semi-final of the just ended FIFA World Cup, losing in the semi-final to France and also the fourth place to Croatia. And just recently, they were able to beat Brazil, Brazil, to become only the second African country to win a game against Brazil after Cameroon did it at the World Cup, and also played a 0-0 draw with Peru. So, they've done it all. And since the commencement of the World Cup, they haven't actually lost a game apart from those two games. And even before the World Cup, the only game they had lost was a 3-0 defeat to USA. But second place on the continent, and I'm sure you should know, Senegal. Yes, they for some time were on top as the first, and they are also the defending champions of the Africa Cup of Nations. And an interesting fact for you to actually note is that since 2020, Senegal have lost just 3 games since 2020. And out of those 3 games they've lost in 3 years, 2 of them were at the World Cup. So ever since 2020, they've lost just a single game if you take out the games from the World Cup, and that was a defeat to Egypt, which they suffered 1-0 in Cairo in the World Cup qualifiers. In the AFCON qualifiers, have actually qualified to the Africa Cup. They've won their opening 4 games, beating Rwanda, beating Benin, beating Mozambique. It was a stroll in the park for them, and they have qualified. So third in Africa in the rankings is actually Tunisia. Tunisia had an okay World Cup. I'll say okay because they were the only team to actually beat France in regulation time in the World Cup, and apart from Argentina, who inflicted a penalty victory over France in the final. France didn't lose again to any other team apart from Tunisia. So there was an okay World Cup, and after the World Cup, they've had an okay time around, and they've also qualified already to the Africa Cup of Nations in group with Libya, Botswana, and also Equatorial Guinea. Tunisia have already booked their spots at the AFCON. So fifth on the continent is actually Algeria. Yes, Algeria. For a very long time, they were close to the top spots, and I'm sure you remember pre the AFCON 2021 when they went 2 years without losing a single match until they suffered their first defeat at the AFCON and eventually were eliminated from the AFCON in group stages and also failed to make it to the World Cup. But since then, they've recovered from those bad times, and they have now booked their spots at the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations. So sixth is Egypt. Egypt have had it tough, losing the AFCON finals to Senegal on penalty shootout, and also losing again the World Cup slots to Senegal again on penalty shootout. But since then, they've had a couple of good victories in friendly matches. Notable of them is beating, that is Belgium, 2-1 in a friendly game before the World Cup. And their last 2 games were against Malawi, and they won all those 2 games. And they are now a game away from making it to the World Cup. And winning their next game means they've secured their spots at the Africa Cup of Nations for 2023. So 7th on the continent is actually the Super Eagles of Nigeria. And they have endured difficult times in the past few months. Their last game they played against Guinea-Bissau was actually a 1-0 win. That game was played far away in Bissau, but they won 1-0. But before then, they had already lost to Guinea-Bissau. That was 1-0 in Abuja. So it's been difficult for Nigeria. In their last 12 games they have played, they won just 3 wins in their last 12 games. That means 9 of them have not ended up in victories for them. And it's been very difficult. They are still trying to find their feet back, and they are still yet to qualify to the Africa Cup of Nations in group with Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, and then also Sao Tome and Principe. So 7th is Cameroon, the indomitable Lions of Cameroon, and they have also endured very, very difficult time. They had an okay World Cup, winning against Brazil, and they became the first African country to actually beat Brazil in an official game. But then, since then, it's been down the spiral. Their last game against Namibia, they lost by 2-1, which meant that to qualify to the Africa Cup of Nations, they will have to beat Burundi in their next game, beat them, and they qualify. Or a draw, a loss could mean that Cameroon will not make it to the Africa Cup of Nations. So 8th place on the continent that's the Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire, they are 8th place on the continent. Their last 2 games are actually very comfortable victories for them, and beating Comoros and also booking their spot to the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations. They are already qualified because they are host nation, but then, they topped their group with that victory, and also meant that they'll be going all the way on top of their group. And that was also good preparations as they host the AFCON in 2024. But it's the 2023 AFCON, which will be hosted in January 2024. So Cote d'Ivoire are 8th on the continent. So 9th on the continent is actually one of the most informed teams on the continent, and that's Burkina Faso. So Burkina Faso have also qualified to the Africa Cup of Nations in group with, that is, Cape Verde, Togo, and then Eswatini. Well, they won all their games but just one. They drew 1-1 against Togo. That game was in Lomé. So apart from that draw, they won all their remaining games, and 3 victories for them. And then the team coming in 10th place is Mali. The Eagles of Mali. They also are 10th on the continent. They are yet to actually qualify to the Africa Cup of Nations, but then they are in pole position to qualify, leading their group with 9 points, in group which includes Gambia, also Congo, Brazzaville, and South Sudan. So they're actually leading the group, and they're in pole position to qualify. If they should just win their next game, they qualify to the AFCON, and they are 10th on the continent. So these are the top 10 teams on the continent of Africa. We have Morocco on top. 2nd place, Senegal. 3rd place comes Tunisia. Then Algeria comes. Then Egypt comes in. Then Nigeria. Then Cameroon. Then Cote d'Ivoire. Then Burkina Faso. Then finally Mali, making up the top 10 in Africa. And notable mentions, Ghana is in 11th place, the Black Stars of Ghana. In 12th place is also South Africa, Bafana. Then we have Congo DR following suit, and it follows as well. So this is how the teams are ranked on the continent.